Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Hillary Dickman. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Admission for Marketing and Communications at Colorado College, and I'm also a parent of 2 college students.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, 2 questions for a listener for you. Dale from Virginia has a lot of questions about the demographic cliff, and Hillary will join me to answer those questions. And then we've got a mom from California who has some questions about whether Columbia should be avoided because of all of the protests that are going on that campus right now, and some of the anti-Semitism. And so Lynda and Lisa will talk about that question. And then we'll continue with part 4 of 5, my interview with Dr. Bob McMahan, the president of Kettering University. And we're talking about Kettering University. And then Jen Mandel's back for part 2 of 4. And it's kind of a potpourri of topics jumping and bouncing around. But this week we'll be talking a lot about going to college for business at a really big school versus a mid-sized school. Friends, on the last episode, I said that our Counselor Connect meeting was on the 29th. This is the 22nd. It's this Sunday. So hopefully that didn't throw you off. We also made sure we got that into YCBK Plus as well to get your attention there with that. I also want to say that you can go ahead and apply for Counselors Connect, but Michelle and I will review all applications 4 times a year at the end of every quarter. So if you've applied at the start of the quarter and you're wondering why you haven't had a response yet, we're accepting new counselors into the Counselor Connect group 4 times a year. All right, let's transition to our episode.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Okay, Hillary, we've got a question from Dale from Virginia. I'm going to play it and get your thoughts.
Hello, Mark and YCBK team. This is Dale in Virginia. I have a question about the demographic cliff and how we should be thinking about it. I've heard it referred to a couple of times in recent podcasts as something that colleges and universities are very focused on. But I also read that the 2025 high school graduating class in the U.S. will be the largest in history. So it seemed that the demographic cliff is coming. It's not coming in the very short term. Are there changes that colleges and universities are going to be making on things like housing or admissions that are going to be felt by those of us who have, high school students? Or is this only a concern for colleges and universities in the long term? And what kind of changes should we expect? And are there some colleges that are going to be more effective than others, or certain regions that are going to be more effective than others? Appreciate any insights in how to think about the demographic cliff. And as always, thanks for everything you guys do.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this question, Dale. It's a great question because we have been talking so much about the demographic cliff that's coming, and it was hard to see that in this year's numbers, right? So the demographic cliff technically starts in 2026, and we are supposed to lose 13%, I think, of the graduating seniors from 2026 to 2041. So it's really, if you looked at it on a graph, especially a long-term graph, it looks more like a slide than a cliff. And yes, there are going to be effects for institutions. I think that those will be more obvious among not the most selective institutions, right? So if you're looking at schools that are admitting 8%, 5%, 3%, the demographic cliff, I'm using air quotes, is probably not going to have a huge impact on them. But for schools that are a little bit more in the middle, so Colorado College is around 20% admit rate and up from there, we are going to be sort of fighting for a smaller group of students. I think what is the maybe more significant challenge that we're facing, well, there are two that I can think of. One is the cultural shift. It's not the demographic shift, it's the cultural shift of families and students not believing that college is worth it. And so therefore the number of college going students is dropping even faster than the number of students graduating from high school. Those two things are not the same, right? Not every student is going to go to college. And that number of college going students is dropping because of the sort of cultural time that we're in. And then the other part is the ROI, that families, even families who want to send their students to college, are feeling like the ROI may not be what it was. And as college costs increase, that makes students less likely to want to pay full freight, which is understandable. And so that also is going to pinch the schools that have a smaller endowment or less support from their state governments.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad how you unpack that. Those are both really important. Sometimes in demographic cliff, it's called the enrollment cliff. You'll hear it use different terms. Basically, what happens is when finances are tight, people have less kids. So when we had the, great global financial crisis, 07 through 09, people had less kids. So you could just fast forward 18 years and that happened. And the reason why Hillary said it's more of a slide going out to 2041 is because the same thing happened again during COVID. So during COVID, people had less kids. So you can just fast forward out 18 years from that and know you're going to have less kids. So this is something that is really a real challenge. And as Hillary said, it's certainly impacts community colleges, impacts regional public schools, and it impacts less selective and moderately selective private schools. Traditionally, flagship schools for the most part have been pretty good, but some of them are struggling if they're in states that are experiencing real outmigration. And then also the whole country is a little different too. Like some places are experiencing an influx and some are experiencing real outmigration. Like that really plays a role as well. Like there are a lot of people moving to places like Georgia and South Carolina and Florida and Texas. And other states, North Carolina, are experiencing a real surge of growth. And then some places, most known in the Midwest and the Northeast, but there's pockets even in other places outside of that are really experiencing massive outmigration. And so that's like a triple factor that gets compounded. But I'm really glad what Hillary emphasized, right? It's that people questioning the ROI, people questioning the value of college, that's almost playing a bigger role. That's accelerating at a faster rate than less kids are graduating from high school. And it's the confluence of all of these factors. And then you throw in the fact that there's more alternative options now. And people out there like Peter Thiel saying, I'll give you $100,000 if you don't go to college and blah, blah, blah. You just have lots of alternatives. That's what produces this whole toxic thing. And you see it, like there are a lot of schools that are closing, merging, downsizing, laying off departments. I mean, I just said something.
Just the news today about Johnson. Oh, you were talking about Johnson.
That
wasn't the news. That was me listening to your podcast.
Yeah, I talked about Johnson in Wales. Like they have a $34 million budget and they're laying off 91 people in both the Rhode Island and the Charlotte location. Hillary, I'm impressed with you. That just dropped. This chat just dropped today.
Well, I need something to listen to on my walk to school every morning. So I enjoy the Mondays and Thursdays the most.
Thank you. And listeners, a lot of you listeners don't know this, but when I record with Hillary, it's kind of special for me because I knew Hillary before she worked at Colorado College.
Yeah.
And so every time I hear you talk, even when I'm talking to you, I'm like, it's just awesome. I've really been a fan of your career and sort of watching you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been fun.
I've learned so much from you. So I know what it's like to be a parent on the other side of this, listening and trying to glean as much information as you can. And I know that can be a really hard place to be. And so it means a lot to me to be able to share as much as I can and as transparently as I can. I think the other part of Dale's question is like, how is this going to affect students, right? And there are going to be increases in admit rates for schools that are not the super highly selective or highly rejective kinds of schools. I mean, this year for us already, we probably will see, we haven't finished with our numbers yet, but I'm guessing that we're going to see a 1 to 2% increase in our admit rate this year. Now, for us, that's relatively small because we're a small school. So we're talking about like, I don't know, a couple hundred kids. But that's going to be happening with a lot of schools. A lot of our peer institutions were struggling to make their class this year. And there are some of them who have bigger endowments than we do. And so they're able to sort of throw money at students in ways that we can't. So we had a bit of a scare last year when we didn't make our class for the first time in decades and decades. And so our reaction this year was to admit more students across the board. And so we're going to be fine with our class for this year or this coming year. But I know that other schools sort of just face this year what we faced last year, and they're going to have to readjust also. So there will be some increases in admit rates for students, but it's not going to be at Harvard or Princeton or Stanford, right? So if you're looking for schools that are a little bit more moderately selective, that could be good for students. And also, like, it's not a guarantee that a school like Colorado College is not going to become a place that admits more students than we deny in the next few years. I have no idea what the future holds beyond that, but things are going to be a little bit less selective for schools like us.
There's that. Thank you. And thank you for your transparency, Hillary. It's really appreciated. And, I have said before on the podcast that people would be surprised that schools that have admit rates in the 20s and 30s sometimes are struggling to make their class.
Yeah. I mean, so Matt and I had a long conversation about this podcast, and this is another thing that we talked about. And I think I'm looking at our conversation. He said, oh yeah, people really don't understand how non-selective, even very selective schools are.
I totally see that.
Yeah, I wish that parents and students could see what you and I see when we can identify students who are admitted to schools that maybe would have surprised you 5 years ago, or that the general public wouldn't think that student would be admitted. And you just never know what the thing is that is sort of the thumb on the scale for a student. And so I want that to be encouraging for families, that like, this is not as much of a like shark infested kind of world as it feels like to you right now.
But, part of the reason for that is people see really low admit rates.
Yeah.
And those low admit rates intimidate people.
But part of that also is because of how many more schools students are applying to now than they were applying to 5 or 10 years ago. And so those admit rates aren't necessarily reflective of the quality of the student.
Sure. And there's, without getting into it a lot, I mean, sometimes it's also schools looking at who they think has had engagement and who's more likely to come.
Right.
So it's
absolutely.
Not, right. So
that's a huge part of it.
Yeah. So you can't just look at that admit rate. And and this really needs to be said, because this is something I have a lot of conversations with admission officers about. Where are the boys? You know? Where are the boys? Like, it is, I mean, colleges need a certain amount of males if they're a co-ed school. And I know that can be disturbing sometimes to young ladies, but the ladies don't want a 75-25 school either.
Yep.
So yeah, that's something that I talk to admission officers about all the time. And it's I'm really glad you brought that up. Like, it's I feel for the public, because this is not an easy thing to figure out, right? A lot of complexities. I'll tell you another thing, and I was going to do a whole Monday episode on this, but I'm just going to say it here because it makes sense to include it. I said maybe 2 months ago, one of the things that I expected to see was more success for students appealing their 8 awards. And then I talked with Andy Strickler about it, and he agreed with that. I still have been blown away. I've never seen so much success from my students appealing their 8 awards.
Interesting.
And also with some very selective schools too. One thing that I never used to encourage students to do I never used to encourage them like to share all of their different awards where they're in at different schools, because it could come off like, are we just a commodity to you and you're just like shopping for price? And so I've encouraged them to share 8 awards before, like share 1 or 2. But some of my students have been like sharing, like, here are 5 or 6 other schools I applied to where that gave me a better award, and they have been getting better awards. And that's just a
Yeah.
function of the fact that the school needs them. Like,
Yep. It's the competition.
yeah. So the bottom line is all of these things do lead to the family having a little bit more leverage.
Yeah.
Because you have more of a finite group of people applying. But once again, we can't stress this enough. Like, this is not a problem that's happening at Duke.
Right.
Like, it is really hard to get into that school unless you're coming with hooks. I can just tell you that.
Yep.
And and it can be really disappointing to the kids that have the high flying stats and all this stuff. And they even apply ED, and then they're like, there's just very limited spots.
Yeah.
And that's true for Stanford, and it's true for Brown, and it's true for Princeton, and it's true for Columbia, and it's true for Caltech. And so it's not every school, but it's most schools.
Yep.
It's most schools. So hopefully this was helpful, Dale. Thank you for sending in this question. Thanks, Hillary.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Hey, Lynda, how are you?
Hey, Lisa, doing great today.
Well, it's exciting to be back in the saddle with you doing questions from a listener,
Yeah.
because it's always so much fun. And our first question that we're going to talk about today is from a mom from California. And let's play our question.
Hi, I'm a mom from California who has a senior that's getting ready to get his offers soon. I have a question about one of the universities that my child has been recently in touch with, and they've been conversing back and forth. We don't have a decision yet. We'll have a decision soon, but that university is Columbia. When we visited it, my child was very interested and would love to go. But given the situation right now, what's happening, is that even something that's advisable? Thanks again for all your insights, interviews. Your podcast has been immensely helpful for us. Thanks.
So this mom is asking, basically, I think, in some ways, a question that I find very difficult to answer. But I'm going to let you take a stab at it first.
Yeah. So I appreciate her question because I know Columbia is in the news a lot. But I don't think it's just a Columbia question. And my gut says I would not tell a student not to consider Columbia based on necessarily what they see on the news, with the possible exception if they were interested in undergraduate research. But this is not a Columbia issue, right? This is a bigger issue that's affecting a lot of schools. But I think if students or families are concerned about protests can happen on a lot of different campuses.
They have happened on a lot of different campuses.
Yeah. And important to realize, even with the schools that are on the news for protests, most students aren't participating in those protests. All of that said, students should certainly never go to a school where they feel unsafe or not welcome. But I know that Columbia is making changes, and the acting president put out, we're recording in the middle of June, put out a statement just in the past day or so about how they are trying to find their way with the federal government and protect research funding.
Yeah, and I think that that's very wise advice. Of course, when this mom asked this question, things were different than they are now. And by the time this plays, things could be different than they are
Exactly.
now. So we really can't say, if it's worth it or not. I would like to think that it is. I would like to think that Columbia's had a lot of great things about it and values for, hundreds of years, and like that can't just go away in, a few short months. But who knows? And I just would say that I tell all my kids to put a diverse list of schools together. So there's schools of all different types that you like. And so then when it comes time to make a decision, you've got hopefully some option that's going to be in sort of at least temporarily in a safe zone, whatever that looks like in the fall of 2026. And, just to be flexible. I always say, like, stay ninja, like, be willing to watch your environment, be willing to react, to move, and just, try to just to go with what's going on at the time, whatever that is.
Yeah. And I think your point is well taken. Things change. And this is exactly why you have a broad, well-balanced list with lots of schools that you would be happy to attend. But, I wouldn't say no off the bat to Columbia,
Right.
but go into it with open eyes, as you should for any school on your list.
Absolutely. So, all right. Well, thanks, Lynda, and good luck, Mom, in California. I hope your son got and is going to where he feels the happiest, and I hope he has a great time at college.
Absolutely. Thanks.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 2 of my interview with Jen Mandel, Jen starts out talking about the differences between large colleges and mid-sized colleges when it comes to the student experience. Then Jen explains the mindset you need to have to excel in business at a place like Madison. And Jen compares the experience of her younger son is having at TCU versus the experience her middle son who's at UW-Madison. I share a few experiences I have had with students having imposter syndrome. Jen shares what she wants families to know when they are trying to decide between a midsize and a large school. Jen shares some people that students should meet with on a college campus, and Jen shares some of the supports the mid-size school offers. If you missed last week, Jen's husband is in business, and all 3 of her biological sons went to college for business, and she also has a foster care son who also went to school for business. So there's business all in her family, and that's what we talk about in this segment. Listen and enjoy. So, like I said, friends, we're going to jump around. And the next thing that I've asked Jen to talk about is something she's shared with me quite a bit. She can't help it. She's got 3 kids, all business majors, all different schools. So you can't help but notice how all their programs are different. And with her middle son being at Madison in their business program, she's often shared with me how different it is from her youngest son at TCU, which it's a brand name in that part of the country, but a lot of people don't know. You look up Poets and Quants, which does a lot of research on business. TCU is consistently up there at the top with places like Kelly for places where alumni say, I would do it all over again if I had to go back there. Like, it exceeds some of the real brand names in the business world. So I would consider it a very underrated gem in the business world, but it's a mid-sized school. We're talking 13, 14,000, almost all undergraduate. Still Division I. You guys have probably seen there in the championship game in football and, big time sports, definitely that. But as a difference between the mid-size private school and the mega large flagship school. So Jen's made quite a few observations and comments to me over the couple years we've been working together on that. And I would just love for you to share with our listeners some of the differences you've noticed. And particularly in the context if a parent, for example, was trying to decide between, a large flagship and maybe moderately sized program, what are some of the differences you've observed?
In listening to in exploring and I can only speak in the context of what I know with my own children, but just looking at, this Wisconsin-Madison's business program, I think a lot of people know it's an amazing business program. It produces great results. But I know in just talking to my own son about the clubs there and going through the student admit day, I remember listening to the students talk about their clubs and talking. I remember this kid talking about how he got into the clubs and the different clubs he's in. And these kids are sharp. They do a lot. And I think one thing that I've picked up on Madison is, a lot of these kids, it's hard to get into the business school at Madison, especially from out of state. So the kids from out of state, they're bringing their A game. It's pretty competitive. So these kids come in and they're ready. And if you're looking at, if you're a parent and you're looking at some of these schools, I don't want to keep harping on the fit, but you really want to make sure that your child is, if this is something that's important to them, to be part of these clubs and, perhaps to be in the business school, to make sure that they are going to be able to have the endurance to be part of that. Again, I know like some students definitely don't have it, but some students like my son, he doesn't get deterred by that. There's certain regions, as I've learned through this job of the college coaching, there's certain regions of this nation where kids are just education and the opportunities that they bring. There's certain regions that these kids are coming with so much more experience and they come in ready. And I guess maybe ready is not the right word, but they come in a little bit more boisterous and a little bit more hardcore than other regions. And when it comes time for clubs, they really, your child has to be ready to, I don't know the right way to say it, but it's very competitive is really the bottom line. And if you want to get a feel for that, it's just raising the level a little bit.
I know there's a term that the college kids use to refer to certain students. What is that term, and what do you think they mean by that term?
I mean, I think some kids from the East Coast in the Midwest. The Midwest is oftentimes known as being like Midwest nice and soft. And, the kids from the East Coast come in and they have been prepared really well for school. And they are, as I said, it's hard to get into the school. And some of the kids on campus call them, if you're from the Massachusetts area, they may call them the massholes. Not my word, but that would be the word that the students use.
And what would they mean by that?
It's used in a friendly, nice gesture, but basically those are the kids that come in just ready to rock and roll. They're taking the clubs. They've got the clubs, they've got the internships, they've got the resumes, they have the resumes ready to go. And your kid better be, not scared of that and ready to go up against it and be confident and able to say, I've got this, like I'm fine, and put on their blinders and say, I'm moving in my own path and I'm ready to move. Nothing where you're going to have that imposter syndrome of, geez, these people are bringing in a whole new game and I don't know how I'm going to compete with that. You can't have that mentality in some of these business schools. You have to be able to put your blinders on, not get deterred, and just move ahead. And a lot of kids can do that. Some kids cannot. Some kids are going to do better off in schools where, not to say that they're going to have imposter syndrome, but they may want an environment where they can maybe talk to their professors more, or have an environment where they can talk to the club members more, and not feel where it's this dog eats dog environment. And I don't know that Madison's like that, but I do get the sense that it's way more competitive.
I have a couple stories I want to share related to this. It's completely different topics, but I think our listeners will find this interesting. One has to do when I was a high school placement director at KIPP, and I was sending a lot of kids to New England boarding schools, West Coast boarding schools, Mid-Atlantic boarding schools. I was having a conversation with the admission director at a school called Episcopal High School, which is a very prestigious school in Alexandria, Virginia. John McCain, it's very wealthy, very desirable. So I was talking with her and I said, tell me who you want to see from me. Describe the kid that you want me to send to you. Now, I was working at a predominantly Black, high percentage of Pell Grant schools, student school, school was. So it's just a little context. So this is what the person said, and it was a great answer. She's like, sometimes when we have smart Black kids coming from under-resourced schools, they come here and they just freeze because you're around senators' kids. And it's so obvious they have imposter syndrome. And then other kids come right in and they mix and they mingle and they just own the room. She's like, send me the kids that own the room. So that's partly what a flashback I had when you said that. And another flashback I had goes all the way back to done quite a bit of work with students related to sports over the years. And I've seen so many kids who we have the saying in athletic recruiting, and I experienced it with my own daughter. We call it D1 or bust. So there's this mindset that's very prevalent, and it's really true across so many different sports. My own daughter, it was basketball, but it's really transferable to so many sports. And I've seen that just working with athletic students over the year in the college process, meaning I want to go to Division One. And in some cases, it's I want to go to high Division One, as in places I see on ESPN. And then when they get there, unless they're a kid that is one of the most talented ones on the team, and they are sitting on the bench all the time, getting up at 5 a.m., going to practice for 4 hours a day, not having any other much social life outside of the school, because Division One, they kind of own you and it's a job. It can be really, really a terrible experience for the kids. They can be very miserable. They're not playing. You're not really treated that respectfully because you're really on the periphery of the core people on the team. And the transfer rate is so high. In fact, when my own daughter was looking at the University of Tampa for basketball recruitment, that coach, all he does is really recruit D1 discontent kids who went to D1, didn't get playing time, and now they're ready to come, to Division II. So I know it's slightly different, but those were two other scenarios where you can have imposter syndrome in certain environments. And so it's one of these things that people don't think a lot about when they're thinking about selecting a school, because there tends to be this magnetic pull to what is perceived as the most prestigious. Like D1, it's more prestigious than playing D2 or D3. Madison, flagship school, national reputation. More people have heard of Madison than maybe a TCU. And this is not to elevate TCU. This isn't all about TCU. It's like there are other schools out there like the TCUs, that in some cases, your student's just going to be better at a place if they're not a certain kind of kid that can hang in a certain kind of environment. And I think that's what you've been trying to say to me, Jen, in our conversations. Would you say that's correct?
That's correct. And I would also argue that the end results can be the same.
Yeah.
The outcomes that I'm seeing out of both schools for jobs and careers are the same. Same jobs, same places, just different schools.
Mm-hmm. So let's see if we can hone in on this a little more. Let's say you're speaking to a parent. Let's say a parent is got the similar type of options. They've got this, well-known national flagship school that's got a really competitive business program. And they've got another amazing school. It's maybe a little smaller, not as big, maybe not as much known nationally. What are some of the indications that you would say to a family that would say, you may be better at this school if this, you may be better at this school if that, if you're faced with those decisions, like knowing what knowing what you've observed, what would be the indications that one environment may be better? And of course, we're not getting into all kinds of other things such as distance from home and cost and campus setting and all kinds of different factors that play a role in fit and match. But just this whole thing of like large, mid-size, sharper elbows, maybe not as sharp elbows. Anything else you want to comment on besides that? What are your thoughts?
Ultimately, your child is going to do best where they're most comfortable. You don't want them to be so comfortable that they're not challenged, to be pushed, to do better, and to grow. The goal of college, part of it is that your child is growing and becoming a better person. You want them to be in an environment that is going to challenge them, but also in an environment that they feel supported in and that they feel like they can grow in. Looking at, the different schools, you're going to have to look at the factors of, where it feels right. And you're going to learn that through not just doing your research online and doing the tours, but by talking to multiple people. If you can, talk to people who are for me, in my case, I would say in the business school, perhaps in the business clubs, in the business career center. Talk to students. Don't just talk to the faculty. Talk to the faculty in the career center if you want, but also talk to maybe juniors or seniors, maybe sophomores even, because the sophomores are probably working on those junior year internships. Talk to juniors, see where they're at with their careers or their internships. Talk to those students that are already halfway through. Get a sense of what did it take to get there? What would you have done differently? And, finding out what the challenges are or were for them. You have to look at, maybe the size of classes and not just necessarily those first year classes, but, as you move ahead, maybe the second and third year classes. Asking, I know there's so many different websites, that resources that you can get a sense, like Poets and Quants too, like how connected do you feel to your professors? How connected do you feel to your university? Part of that goes back to the child's, sense of connectedness. If you feel connected, I think you're going to feel like you have fit in. And if you feel like you fit in, you're going to feel like taking those risks and going out for the clubs and being your authentic self to interview and show humility and do all of those things you have to do to take those risks and put yourself out there for those internships and those mentorship opportunities and have those mistakes, but also have all of those wonderful successes that students have in colleges. But you have to be able to feel real comfortable there in order to do that. And you have more success when you feel comfortable in a campus setting.
Are there specific things that you see a TCU doing that you don't see happening at Madison that may make it easier for someone, who's not coming in and bolstering, just brimming with confidence and with a pretty established resume already? Are there any things that you actually see the school does for someone that's not coming in like that can help them get from point A to point B?
Well, I'm not an admissions rep for them, but I do think they have so much within their setting. It's so different. It's such a different university. They have their housing, their residence life takes a whole approach to ensuring the whole person. I can't remember the name of it, but I talked to somebody there in the residence life, and they have a whole different approach to how they approach residence life. So part of it is just, how they approach the child in housing, which is, building that student up. So first of it is from the housing perspective. They also do a lot before school even starts. They have something, called Frog Camp. So they have all the kids there before school starts. So you build those connections for, I forget how many days, maybe it's 3 days where and you don't have to, but most students do it, where you do a few overnights with your students and you get to know the students ahead of time. So you've already built those connections. Once you're on campus, they have like a lot of campuses do. They do a lot, to get to know the students the first week. They have all these wonderful activities. They do a lot with your professors. The classes tend to be a little bit smaller. So it's up to the student to make those opportunities happen, right? You can lead a horse to water. So they have a lot of the small classes for students. They have the clubs there.
Friends, this concludes this part of my interview with Jen Mandel. Hope you join us next week for the next session.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, we're more than halfway done my 2-hour interview with Dr. Bob McMahan, president of Kettering University. In part 4, Bob tells us about additional personal qualities that Kettering looks for, things that make an applicant pop in the application process. Bob tells us about the roles essay plays in the admission process. Bob tells us about the role recommendations play in the admissions process. Bob tells us about interviews and demonstrated interest in the role they play in the admission process. Bob talks about how they discern if a student has buy-in to their unique model. Bob talks about the importance of campus visits. So there's a big focus on the admission process in part 4. Bob answers the question, how many people go into work in the automotive industry? And Bob answers the question, what have we not discussed yet about Kettering University that's important? Listen and enjoy. Okay, Bob, I know we've talked a lot about grit and resilience as one of the things that, that you're looking for in your students at Kettering. Any other personal qualities that make a student pop?
Well, first and foremost for us, intellectual curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Students who are driven to understand how things work, they can make better processes, better versions, etc. Those are students. These are problem solvers. These are our kind of students. And we encourage all students with this kind of a mindset to apply. And we really tailor a lot of our admissions process around that type of a student.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, because curious minds want to know, right? You
Absolutely,
can go a long ways with that curiosity. Yeah.
We ask students about their interest in high school, and encourage them to talk about that. And the areas like robotics and esports, everything that has to do with that kind of problem-solving mindset.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about how, an applicant is evaluated. And I know you're in, regular communication with your admission director about this sort of thing. So I'll just go through a few things and let me know if they're involved in your process at all.
Okay.
Any essays, either required or optional?
They're required as part of the Common App. And they really help provide insight for us beyond the kind of the transcripts, but they're not really a significant factor in the process. We consider them, of course, for students who are maybe on the admissions borderline for us. And all of our applicants have the opportunity to choose from one of 7 Common App prompts or submit a topic of their own choosing.
Yeah. So you're using the Common App personal statement there. Mm-hmm. And you're using it, for on the fence borderline students. What about recommendations? I mean, some schools, it's common for a counselor rec to come in. A lot of schools want teacher rec. Some want 1, some want 2, some make them optional. Some schools allow for an other rec, a non-relative adult who knows the student outside the classroom. And then some schools even have, peer recs, parent recs, different things like that. And do you guys do anything when it comes to requiring recommendations?
We don't require recommendations, but they can be submitted either via the Common App or through our web-based applications process. And we do use them when they are submitted to support the application. And again, if there's a student that requires kind of careful consideration because they come from an unusual background or have a particularly intriguing history, we can use those in that circumstance as well. Mm-hmm. But again, they're not required.
Yeah. What about an interview? Most schools don't require them, but there are schools that have them. Do you have an interview at all as part of your process?
No, we don't. They're not required as well, but of course the director of enrollment may request them in certain cases, but in general, no.
Mm-hmm. And then some schools are looking at the level of engagement the student has had with the school, sometimes called demonstrated interest. Does that play a role at all in who gets admitted, identifying students that have maybe visited campus virtually or in person or had a lot of interaction? Does that factor in?
Not a factor, but of course we welcome students and prospective students to come to campus because once they come here, they get hooked.
Mm-hmm. Would it be fair to say you're mostly doing a review of the transcript, looking at grades, grade trends, rigor, and test scores? Is that the meat of the evaluation, do you feel?
I think that's the meat of the evaluation, but of course, we really do strive to create a really a holistic evaluation of the individual student, because a lot of the students who come to us with that kind of background, they have unusual histories, many of them, and so we try to take all of aspects of what brought them to us into account.
I mean, you have such a unique model with 50% in school, 50%, you know, having these high impact experiences in industry. How do you suss out whether or not a student has buy-in into that? I would think you would want to know that the students you're going to admit buy into that they embrace that. But I'm trying to figure out how you're able to discern that just off transcripts and test scores and a personal statement.
Well, we have a pretty extensive admissions, interaction with the student before they ever show up on campus. We really do try to tailor and personalize all of our materials for and kind of the communications of what we do specifically to the student. So they know very well who we are and the kind of program that we represent when they come here. And of course, there's a lot of activities that lead into the academic year during the first year, things that we have where we're prepping our students for success. So we're teaching them how to work in these professional environments, et cetera. So there's a lot of lead in to the beginning of the academic year, at the end of which the students are very well versed on what we're about and how we go about what we do.
Do you factor in at all whether or not a student is visited? Come by there or not? Does that play a role at all in any of the assessment?
It doesn't play a role in the assessment directly, but what we find in practice is when students come to visit the campus and they see what we do and how we do it, and their parents or their guardians, they get to experience the university and the atmosphere of the place, and they get to meet with other students. Usually, that's when students typically say, "Okay, this is for me," and so we encourage students to come to campus, because then they can get a real sense of what this looks like in practice. And for students who are attracted to a Kettering type of education, that visit is almost an irresistible invitation to come.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I've always been curious because of your history with GMI, and I have to admit, like before this interview, like the people I always referred your way were people that really loved cars and had expressed interest in automotive engineering. Like a lot of, you'll meet students say, I want to do automotive engineering. And there's really not very many programs out there that really call themselves automotive engineering, right? Like a lot of school students will do mechanical, and then they can get jobs in automotive through mechanical. And some schools have like electives and things, and they can get it that way. What percentage of your students would you say end up working in the auto industry? And if you don't know that from some report, what would be kind of your estimate?
Well, prior to 1982, when we became a private institution, a private nonprofit university, the vast majority of our graduates entered the automotive industry because we were part of General Motors Institute. But subsequent to that, we've engaged with over 400, almost 500 corporate partners across industries. So aerospace and defense, automation, industrial machinery, electronics, software, chemicals, services, medicine, medical systems, even construction, consulting, manufacturing of all kinds. So across a broad swath of industries. So we don't focus on automotive, we focus on preparation across all of these venues. And so you'll find our graduates in every field of pursuit across the board, be it in engineering disciplines, in business, medicine, law. They are in all of those fields. What's interesting is about your question is what is automotive anymore?
Mm-hmm. That's a good
Because
question.
all of these, I mean, it used to be in 1950, 1960, you could say what's automotive and everybody knows exactly what you mean. But today, I mean, we have one alum who started a cutting edge software firm out in Silicon Valley, is one of the leading architects of autonomous vehicle systems and autonomous, manufacturing systems. Is that automotive?
Yeah,
Well, it has an automotive
sure.
application. Is it high-tech Silicon Valley software? Well, it's that too.
Yeah.
And so you see a smearing of all these lines, especially when you have graduates that are engaged in so many different fields so actively and at such high levels.
Yeah, and I'll just tell you, for me personally, this has really been, an epiphany, because learning how much broader your reach is, it really allows me to refer you to such a larger range of students, where in the past, as soon as I found that kid that loved cars and loved to tinker, I was saying, hey, here's a school to check out. But I really didn't think of you. I'm just being honest. I really didn't think of you outside of that context.
Yeah,
So we have a lot of college counselors who listen, who probably, or may, I don't say, I'm not assuming anything, but may have been where I was in their mindset. So yeah,
yeah.
this has been great. Anything we haven't said about Kettering that you want to say?
No, I think it's been a very great discussion, and I appreciate very much and thank you for the opportunity because, to your point, a lot of people think of it that way, but I was this last week, kind of off the record. I was this last week. I was visiting with one of our alums who's the top patent litigation counsel for Winston Sonsini out in California, in San Francisco. I mean, this is a firm that is the go-to firm by every high-tech company in Silicon Valley, and he's litigated Apple's patents, but he's a patent attorney. He's a patent trial lawyer, but he's also a Kettering grad.
Well,
And you see that. And why is he successful? I would argue in part because he went here, what he learned here, the engineering that he learned here. All of those pieces come together in some really interesting ways in our alumni because of that. We're I would go so far as to say we're the best combination of the old school engineering and the new, and it shows in our graduates.
well, one thing I know is parents really love the idea of their student working in their field while going through school. It just makes a lot more sense. Um,
It makes so much
on so
sense.
many levels, right? Like, one, confirmation,
Yeah.
this is what you want to do, but then also learning how the world works, and then getting job experience, and then increased marketability. And I was reading something maybe about 3 months ago. I didn't realize how many engineers are leading Fortune 500 companies. I saw a chart
Absolutely.
that had Fortune 500 CEOs broken down by college degree, and engineering blew everything else away, you know?
It's because of the mindset that you learn in engineering. It is powerful. It is a skill set that carries you throughout life and across all these. That's why it's not just a frivolous claim when we say, our our graduates are in all of these industries because they really truly are, and it's for that reason, in part, that they can be that they can function in all of these different roles in all of these different industries because the basic things that they learned apply, and they can carry that knowledge forth across all of these. And I think that's to your earlier point, one of the things that I I think is a confusion, and if there's a way to make this point, I think it's important. We tend to think that, I mean, in the back of our minds, we tend to think if you have, or some people think in the back of their minds, if you have a if you have a co-op component to your education, that you're somehow sacrificing the classroom experience, that comes at the expense of the classroom experience. But that's not true. When you look at a program like ours, we do both, and we do both equally well. There's no compromise in what you learn. There's no compromise in how you learn. There's no compromise in the volume or the rigor or the scope of what you learn in this program, in the classroom. But on top of that, you get the experience. That's one of the reasons that our students go all year round. They are in that rotation because we use all that time wisely. And we provide them with both through this. So you can have a cooperative experience. You could have that application piece without sacrificing the quality, the rigor, the scope of what you do in the classroom. That's the thing that I think a lot of people don't quite, in the back of our mind, there's this nagging idea that if you're doing that, you can't be doing this. But if you organize yourself from the beginning to do both, which is what we did 100 years ago, if you organize yourself from the beginning to do both, you can do both effectively and with equal quality.
I'll be honest with you, Bob. I don't really ever get that objection. And I talk to people all the time about co-ops. It makes sense to them. And I saw one stat that said 53% of co-op employers end up hiring somebody from a co-op, as far as their full-time job, right? And a lot of times people have job offers junior year. I don't ever get that objection. And I think it's because probably the schools that do it can show the proof of look at our job placement, and that satisfies that. Yeah. The biggest challenge is similar to what I get maybe with the service academy, and that is the person that wants what do you think of as their traditional college stuff, the big football, the fraternities, and all of that stuff, and some of that stuff comes with bigger schools and bigger scale. And that's just a different person that's cut out to go to a Michigan State or Northwestern or whatever the school is, Purdue. Indiana. I'm trying to give the Big Ten some love, the Midwest some love. I'm picking Midwest examples. Ohio State.
I always say when people say that to me, people say that to me, I say we have fraternities and sororities too, and we have Ann Arbor football 30 miles away.
Yeah, you know what? You got to do what you got to do. I was talking to I can't remember. See if I can remember the school. Oh, Belmont, little Belmont, in Nashville. So they do something that I think is smart because they don't have the football, but they've gotten us an arrangement where their students can go to the Vanderbilt games and be part of the Vanderbilt's cheering section. And I said, that was brilliant there because,
that's smart.
You'll get some people that I can have my cake and eat it too kind of thing. Friends, this concludes part 4 or 5 of my interview with Dr. Bob McMahan, president of Kettering University for the last 14 years. We hope you join us next week for the final part. On Monday's episode, I'll have another session in the counseling room that a family gave me permission to share with you that I hope you find interesting and you can learn from. I'll also have my final part of my discussion about holistic admissions. And friends, we will have part 3 of Lynda's interview with Jay Hall, and they're discussing successfully transitioning from high school to college. And friends, I told you before I was going to share some Carnegie quotes. Dale Carnegie, from his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, that's had the second most impact on me of any book other than the Bible, although there are a couple others that are in the conversation. But here's what Carnegie says in the book. The world is full of people who are grabbing and self-seeking. So the rare individual who unselfishly tries to serve others has an enormous advantage. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. Big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Escobar in Massachusetts, Lynda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Matvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.